Started. Hello and welcome everyone to the webinar 2025 DBIR from Vulnerabilities to Exposure. My name is Jagdish Upadhyay. I'm the head of marketing at Balbix. I'm excited to have you join us as we dig into the DBIR report with two experts that live and breathe this space, Alex Pinto from Verizon and Aravind Iyengar from Balbix. Today, we'll cut through the noise and look at the data, what it really says, and explore how exposure-centric risk-aligned practices can help you focus on what truly matters for reducing cyber risk. But before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A box in the control panel, and we'll take up the questions towards the end. Over to you, Arvind.
All right. Thank you, Jagdish. Hi and welcome, everyone. Very glad to be here and to be talking about this topic near and dear to many of our hearts, and have Alex join us and share his insights as well from DBIR. And so I think the main theme that we want to get started with is why chasing after every CVE is impossible, in the sense that it is neither an achievable target nor an efficient target. From most of our conversations with enterprises and organizations dealing with risk management, vulnerability management, um, enterprises rely very heavily on standardized metrics like CVSS for defining their SLAs of what is to be prioritized, and in what cadence do they go after those. And typically, from what we have seen, especially in the recent few years, this is leading to extremely inefficient operations. Not only because this is not completely aligned with risk reduction for enterprises, but also because it is continuously leading uh, security teams to having alert fatigues. And just the sheer volume of the vulnerabilities and the CVEs is so large that it's uh, an impossible target to go after. And so uh, I will hand over the next few slides to Alex, who will share with us some insights from the DBIR that was released earlier this year. We are glad to be collaborating with Verizon in gathering some data towards this DBIR, and we want to hear his insights and takeaways on this theme. So, Alex, over to you.
All right, thank you, Aravind. So, like Aravind said, my name is Alex, and I am one of the authors of the Data Breach Investigations report that Verizon puts together every year. So, I really wanted to talk about on the next slide about some of the data that we uncovered and some of the data that we did a joint research with Balbix around how actually does patching cadence happen in real life, and what are the results? Are we meeting our targets? And how does it really the landscape looks like? And so we're living in a world here where we had almost 30,000 CVEs in 2024, which, I mean, it's a lot to look through, right? Of course, not everybody has every single software in the world. No organization will have to patch 30,000 vulnerabilities. But I mean, they might have 30,000 machines, but that's not quite the point. The thing is, of course, cutting through this absolute pile of information and figuring out how to prioritize what you should do first, it just becomes, it's the name of the game. It's really how you try to beat that and how you try to focus on defending your own organization. Because the numbers that we found as we were looking at, so we were focusing on a couple different things on the report, right? We looked at both the CISA CAV list, which is the known exploited vulnerabilities list that they provide, and also a very short list of edge of network device vulnerabilities, things like Palo Alto, Fortinet, that really had a very strong showing last year to try to figure out how spreading cadence above those, because those would be uncontroversially the critical ones, right? We can start, there's a lot of ways to optimize. There's a lot of different strategies how to optimize what you're patching first. And of course, Balbix will be talking about the work that they do. But let's be very simple. What are people screaming at us to patch right now, right? Because it's an active exploitation and things of the sort. So even with that threat, that very clear and present danger there, we found that in the median time for an organization to patch the edge device, the edge of network device vulnerabilities they had last year was around a month, a little bit over a month, 32 days. Of course, half of those took less than a month, right? You see some very efficient companies, probably very high maturity companies where they might have taken a day or a few days. But the median case, right? 50% of all companies, they took a month or more. And it's a very concerning picture when you look at how long does it take for a vulnerability to be mass exploited, in the sense that we found that 50% of all vulnerabilities on the CISA took less than 5 days from CVE publication, right, to their specific CVE being put on the CISA list. CVE publication is already kind of an overstatement there, right? There are early indications we could have taken. Being put in the CISA is a very late indicator as well. People are usually aware that vulnerability is happening. That when they realize, then they put it on the CAF. So this is a very generous estimate. This is definitely not a worst case estimate there, right? In 5 days against 32 days is, of course, concerning. So if we can move to the next slide, it's important for us to not forget that all of this happens for a reason, right? The threat actors are not just like exploiting vulnerabilities because they find it's fun. Some of them do, but they really want something. They really want to get to a specific objective that they might have. And so this is one of the other charts we have on the report. We're talking about the initial access vectors. And so what was the initial step that an attacker took before the breach finished, before they exfiltrated the data and ran away with it? And the concerning thing here that we want to raise is that for the past couple of years, from the data we have gathered, the exploitation of vulnerabilities have increased as a focus of initial step, right? So it's around 20% now, and it's incredibly close to credential abuse, which, look, if you had been doing this DBIR thing for as long as I have, you would see how absolutely alarming this is, because credential abuse has been number one for all of the period, right? All of the 18 years that we have done the report. The fact that exploitation of vulnerabilities is getting so efficient and people are being able to, quote unquote, weaponize those vulnerabilities so quickly and have such a good efficiency metric, so to speak. The breach happened. So that's what efficiency looks like. Around that is really something that, we should not be we shouldn't really be ignoring. One other important point that I want to raise just before we move on is that 44% of all breaches that we talked about on the DBIR this year were ransomware related. And it's not here on this chart, but I think it's important to point out that for those ransomware breaches, when we're looking just at those, exploitation vulnerabilities is actually number one. And so this makes it even more critical for us to take the challenge of keeping those things under control even more seriously, right? And so just to cap up, just want to do just really hammer the point home on the next slide. We have a kind of what we call the instant patterns, which is kind of a shorthand of how breaches happen, right? When we talk about it on the report, we have all sorts of different metrics to track, but these are kind of like, that's a simple way of describing a vulnerability. And you see that both in incidents as a whole, right? That's the top one. And both on breaches, right? And so some incidents don't have data exploitation, so they're not breaches, but all breaches are incidents. You see system intrusion there, which is the dark purple, like wineish color there, being number one type of incident that we saw. Again, this is where ransomware lives. It's a trend that has been growing over the past few years, right? It's really, everybody has been following this. And so, this relationship, this marriage, right, between ransomware operations and them getting better at weaponizing vulnerabilities and sometimes being maybe not as efficient or as prolific as nation states in bringing 0 days to the table, right, has really kind of changed the calculus on how we should be looking at this specific problem. And we used to talk about, oh yeah, of course, if a nation state wants to get you, they'll just burn a 0 day, right? If whatever you have is valuable enough, they're using 0 days for just normal financial crimes now. So the kind of the calculus really has changed over the past couple of years, right? And so hopefully my friend Aravind here has some insights and some ideas on how we can start fighting back, given this very cheerful picture that I just painted here based on our findings.
All right. Thanks, Alex, for grounding us in data and data collected across the enterprises of the world. So three main takeaways, right? So one, the volume of vulnerabilities and exposures is growing. It's not just growing, it's accelerating. Two, they're being exploited faster than ever, and that pace at which they're getting exploited is also becoming accelerated on account of the ease of exploitation becoming easier and tools for exploitation becoming more accessible. And three, um, while CVEs are the proportion of exploits uh, that are including CVE exploitation as the initial step is growing, there are also a larger number of more general non-CVE vulnerabilities and exposures at play. And so it's not just enough to focus attention on CVEs, but to cast your attention wider as well. And so the answer here is not just to be able to patch faster. We need to be able to patch and remediate smarter. And the recourse for security teams here is to be able to tap into um, what truly matters for them, to decide how to prioritize, or in this case, more importantly, how to deprioritize, right? And the best way to do this is to go and rely on the risk drivers that are at play. And the risk drivers being accessibility. Even though vulnerabilities and exposures exist, do they exist on assets that are reachable, and are they exploitable from where an adversary might try to um, attack them? So, for example, remotely accessible remote code executions, for example, obviously bubble up to the top in such a way of prioritization. More But it becomes more nuanced than that, because there are several dependencies that typically need to be satisfied for something to be exploitable. For example, is user interaction required, or privileges required to be met for an adversary, and before those privileges could be escalated, etc. And so being able to tap into those factors is a good way to discern what is truly to be prioritized and what can be deferred to be remediated. The second factor, obviously, is exploitability. Um, this pertains to how, assuming that there is an exposure and it is accessible, how easy is it for a threat actor to be able to act upon it and exploit it? And again, like both Alex and I alluded to earlier, the ease of being able to craft exploits is increasing. And so therefore, um, being able to tap into threat signals, being able to tap into what is actively being exploited, or what is uh, having even unverified or verified POC exploit kits out there in hacker communities and the dark web, etc. That becomes crucial. Um, and the third factor obviously is impact. So yes, so there may be an exposure, but is it uh, present on an asset where, if compromised, there is material damage for the particular environment in question, right? So bringing together all of these factors becomes important, and so therefore this is where it becomes important to not just look at CVE level prioritization, but to be able to dig into where they are present. So the instances of where these exposures are found, uh, and being able to prioritize and segregate them uh, based on their importance on that basis becomes crucial. And so obviously prioritization uh, rules of thumbs will be um, go after internet facing vulnerabilities that are known to be exploited already. Make sure that there are no key vulnerabilities open on critical business systems, um, and even on systems that are internal to the network but may be present on exploitable paths, be able to prioritize those as well. And so what that pertains to is being able to put together for every instance or every occurrence of such exposures uh, a varied set of these factors, and be able to measure, bring together all of them and measure an importance or a prioritization score as a consequence, right? And there are four key elements here again. First is uh, asset attributes or business context. This is where you're looking at your own environment and you're able to say, okay, here are assets which are key for business functionality and are mission critical, and therefore need to be prioritized ahead of everything else. And so that's where the role of assets on the network, what their implicit impact is, perhaps on the basis of data resident on those assets, or on the basis of what they in turn allow adversaries to access thereafter in terms of their blast radius. Those things come into the picture. Um, and so tags that you can tap into in terms of what business units they belong to, what kind of an environment, development versus production they are present on, etc. Those things naturally become important. And zone and subzone of the network, whether they are internet exposed or on the DMZ internal, they are part of a segmented sub network, or they're part of the air gap network. All of these things are very relevant for being able to prioritize effectively. The second set, which is what is typical of vulnerability management solutions, is to look at vulnerability metrics themselves, attributes for those. Attack vector, where is the said exposure exploitable from? Um, does it require preconditions to be met? So, for example, an exposure is exploitable provided there is this software running with this command line argument uh, being present. So, is that truly the case, or is it the case that those conditions are not being met? So, being able to tap into those. Um, any privileges that are precursors for an attacker to be able to exploit, again, can become impediments, and so therefore can be markers for prioritization. Um, Other vector string attributes are severity related. So, for example, is it affecting if it's affecting a software component, is it affecting a user space component or a kernel space component? Obviously, that defines what the blast radius and the degree of compromise that is feasible. Is there loss of confidentiality or availability, or is there a combination of those two in terms of integrity? And is there change in scope for an adversary who is able to exploit this? So all of these things factor into how severe the consequences, and thereafter, how difficult is it to actually exploit the vulnerability, and to what for what period of time is it exposed. That also allows adversaries to be able to uh, manage to exploit versus being inhibited while in the attempt of exploiting. Um, and the external signals, are there threats known to be present? Is there chatter amongst hacker communities that these vulnerabilities and exposures are being talked of as being exploited? And more recently, there are more of a predictive signal approach to intelligence, and that is in the form of EPSS, where we try to come up with a metric of how likely there is an exploit of said exposure in the wild in the next 30 days. And so that can become an early indicator of requiring prioritization. And in conjunction with all of these, there is what controls you have in play already. So there may be um, a red team testing that has been done that has confirmed that certain vulnerabilities or certain types of exploits are not feasible. So can you tap into that signal? Um, there may be breach and attack simulation tools in play where we are trying to simulate certain types of exploits and found that they are exploited or not. So being able to look at that, being able to look at what controls are already in play, be it in terms of configuration hardening to obviate or to preclude the occurrence of exposure itself, or in terms of detection and response, EDR like deployments to be able to uh, reduce the chances of exploitation, or it may be in terms of data backups being present to curtail the consequence or the severity of something being already exploited. All of these things put together um, impact, I mean, they come together both to define what the impact of compromise is as well as the likelihood of compromise, and those two in turn are put together to form what is a true measure of risk in terms of the exposure score. And being able to do this by hand, obviously, as I'm walking through this, you guys can imagine that it's not a manually doable exercise, and being able to leverage tools is therefore very crucial for this. And Balbix, which also powers Verizon's CRP, is is a platform that does this at the granularity of each vulnerability instance exposure um, out of the box. And we are able to tap into all of these signals from across the enterprise and be able to therefore provide a meaningful and risk aligned exposure score to guide prioritization. So, to summarize and put all of these things together, um, one, yes, the volume of vulnerabilities is growing, but we don't need to chase after everything. Um, if we are smart and intelligent, prioritize on the basis of where there is a true exposure, both in conjunction with what security controls may already be in play, as well as what is the true consequence of a compromise of some asset in terms of business impact for the said environment. That becomes a very crucial tool in prioritization. And being able to leverage automated tools for this kind of an exposure management is going to make the security operations in turn extremely efficient and completely aligned with the goal of risk reduction. So the parting quote I want to leave you guys with is you don't need to outrun every CVE, but just the ones that are likely exploited and have material consequences for your environment. And being able to do this efficiently and in an automated way uh, becomes the more automated it is, the more efficient the process becomes, and the exposure management as an operation becomes efficient.
Thanks,
Or
Aravind. I think we have a few questions that we can take. I don't think we can take all the questions given the time that we have in the webinar, but let's address a couple of them. And this question is for both of you, for Alex and for Arvind. The question is basically the DBIR attackers focus on exposure, not just vulnerabilities. How do you recommend security teams measure and track exposure in a way that's actionable for day-to-day operations? So maybe Arvind, you go first, and then Alex, or maybe Alex, you go first.
yeah, great question. I think, like we referred to earlier, you need to cast a wider net than just CVEs. And that is where I think, like I was explaining, being able to tap into the underlying attributes of what is truly risk exposed from each exposure becomes crucial, be it in terms of asset attributes where they're exposed, the vulnerability attributes as well, in terms of what conditions need to be met for their exploitation, threat attributes, how likely there are known exploits or known patterns of exploiting said vulnerabilities based on what we know historically has been exploited. And finally, what controls you have at play. And so, therefore, the ROI you're getting from those controls are how much time you buy for your team to be able to respond to those. And being able to tap into all four of those is crucial.
Awesome. Does Alex, you have any points to add?
No, I don't have a lot to add to that. It's really there's always like a causal relationship. There's always on one side you have to be incredibly aware of again what you have, how are the dominoes exactly lined up, as in, oh, if this thing goes down, then off goes my production system. And combining that knowledge, that internal knowledge, right, with the kind of understanding and statistics that something like the DBIR or or other like threat intelligence focused reports might have, as in, oh, this is what they're going for, or these are the types, specifically types of assets that have been most targeted, because again, that helps you calibrate um, where you want to go, where you want to be. And again, like Aravind was saying, right? If you're putting together some sort of algorithm, so some of idea on how to address that, it's very important to have both perspectives in it.
Yeah, that's great. So we are almost out of time. I don't think we can address more questions, but there are a couple of them. So I promise to get you the answers when we send the recording of this webinar and provide you a direct link to the DBIR report. So thank you all for joining us today for this webinar. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can also go to the website and request a demo with us, and we can jump into specific topics that you have. So thank you for now. Have a nice day.
Thank you.